Hi, this is Aubrey with Knitting by Aubrey, and today we're going to make an Afghan square with the pattern of a horse on it. And so it's going to be really fun. I love horses. And the square can be a washcloth or a hot pad or a piece of art or an Afghan square. It can be anything you want it to be. And so let's get started. Here is what our finished horse square will look like. It should be 8.5 by 8.5 inches. And you can see that we have the stockinette stitch here and the seed stitch here. And then the horse is made up of the garter stitch. And so it's very cute and I love it. You can see that the horse's stance is adorable and its tail is so cute. And I just really love this pattern. You can see that when I flip it over, it is not reversible. This is what it looks like on the wrong side. So it's better to have the stockinette stitch showing like this. It's really cute. Today I'm using size 4 yarn. It's medium yarn and it's 100% acrylic. You can use any yarn and any needles you want. I'm using number 6 needles today. So here's our pattern, and I will link this in the description below. To start, I'm going to cast on 45 stitches, and these stitches should be even and beautiful. For rows 1 through 7, I'm going to do the seed stitch, which is knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, all the way across the row. And so I'm going to start with a knit and I'm going to end with a knit on every single seed stitch row. If you need a video about casting on or the seed stitch, I will link some below in the description. Here's what row 1 should look like. Here I have done 7 rows in the seed stitch. This is the beginning of our border. For rows 8 and 10, you will K1, P1, K1, P1, K37, P1, K1, P1, K1. Row 9 is going to be different, but rows 8 and row 10 will be the same. For row 9 and all other odd number rows, you will do the same thing. You will K1, P1, K1, P1, K1, P35, K1, P1, K1, P1, K1. So you'll start with 5 stitches in the seed stitch, then you'll do 35 purls and end with 5 stitches in the seed stitch. This is for all of the odd rows. It's the same. this is what all of your odd rows will look like. Here's the right side, and here's the wrong side. After you have done row 11 in the odd number row pattern, it's time for row 12. This is K1, P1, K1, P1, K11, P3, K8, P3, K12, P1, K1, P1, K1. So the first 4 stitches will be in the seed stitch, and the last 4 stitches will be in the seed stitch as well. We are starting to make the horse's hoofs. After row 13 in the odd stitch, we will do row 14, which is K1, P1, K1, P1, K4, P1, K5, P3, K4, P2, K2, P3, K13, P1, K1, P1, K1. After row 15 is row 16. Row 16 is K1, P1, K1, P1, K4, P2, K4, P2, K4, P3, K2, P2, K7, P3, K4, P1, K1, P1, K1. Remember to look at the written pattern in the description for all of these numbers for knits and purls. After row 17 is row 18, which is K1, P1, K1, P1, K4, P4, K2, P2, K4, P2, K3, P2, K6, P3, K5, P1, K1, P1, K1. After row 19, you'll do row 20, which is K1, P1, K1, P1, K5, P4, K1, P2, K4, P2, K3, P3, K4, P3, K6, P1, K1, P1, K1. We are making the horse's legs and its muzzle. After row 21, you'll do row 22, which is K1, P1, K1, P1, K5, P4, K1, P2, K3, P3, K3, P3, K4, P3, K6, P1, K1, P1, K1. Remember that for all of the odd rows, you're going to knit like you would knit row number 9. So make sure that you do all of the odd rows the same. After row 23, you'll do row 24, which is K1, P1, K1, P1, K6, P3, K1, P3, K1, P4, K4, P3, K3, P2, K7, P1, K1, P1, K1. After row 25, you'll do row 26, which is K1, P1, K1, P1, K5, P4, K1, P8, K4, P3, K2, P3, K7, P1, K1, P1, K1. After row 27, you'll do row 28, which is K1, P1, K1, P1, K5, P3, K1, P10, K3, P7, K8, P1, K1, P1, K1. After row 29, you'll do row 30, which is K1, P1, K1, P1, K4, P3, K2, P19, K9, P1, K1, P1, K1. After row 31, you'll do row 32, which is K1, P1, K1, P1, K4, P3, K2, P19, K9, P1, K1, P1, K1. Row 32 is actually the same as row 30, so you'll do the same for both of those. After row 33 is 34, and this one goes K1, P1, K1, P1, K4, P3, K2, P19, K9, P1, K1, P1, K1. Row 34 is the same as row 32 and row 30, so it's the same pattern for those rows. After row 35, you'll do row 36, which is K1, P1, K1, P1, K4, P4, K1, P19, K9, P1, K1, P1, K1. Row 36 is slightly different than rows 34, 32, and 30, so make sure that you do it the way it's supposed to be, and so it's different. After you do row 37, you'll do row 38, which is K1, P1, K1, P1, K5, P22, K3, P2, K5, P1, K1, P1, K1. After you do row 39, you'll do row 40, which is K1, P1, K1, P1, K6, P3, K1, P6, K4, P7, K2, P4, K4, P1, K1, P1, K1. You'll notice that the lighting of this video is different than the other ones because it's a different time of day, but hopefully you can still see it. After you do row 41, you'll do row 42, which is K1, P1, K1, P1, K21, P12, K4, P1, K1, P1, K1. After you do row 43, you'll do row 44. K1, P1, K1, P1, K22, P11, K4, P1, K1, P1, K1. After you do row 45, you'll do row 46, which is K1, P1, K1, P1, K22, P11, K4, P1, K1, P1, K1. And yes, row 46 is the same as row 44, so those two rows have the same pattern. After you do row 47, you'll do row 48, which is K1, P1, K1, P1, K23, P10, K4, P1, K1, P1, K1. And yes, this is different than row 46 and 44. After you do row 49, you'll do row 50, which is K1, P1, K1, P1, K24, P9, K4, P1, K1, P1, K1. After row 51, you'll do row 52, which is K1, P1, K1, P1, K26, P6, K5, P1, K1, P1, K1. These rows, row 54 and 56, will be the same. You'll do the odd pattern for row 53, and then for 54 and 56, you'll do K1, P1, K1, P1, K37, P1, K1, P1, K1. For row 55, you will do the same odd pattern. For the last 7 rows, you will do the seed stitch. So K1, P1, K1, all the way across to the last stitch. You'll start with a knit and you will end with a knit on every single seed stitch row. This will be the last border before we finish. Your Afghan square should look like this chart. Once you have done those last 7 rows, you will cast off. And when we cast off, we will do it in the seed stitch. So again, alternating between K and P. So what you'll do is you'll start with a knit, and then you'll purl, and then you'll pull that right stitch over the top of the left stitch and continue in the seed stitch. If you need help with casting off, I will link a video down below in the description that will make it super easy for you. But this is our last step. Here's our last stitch. With our last stitch, I'm going to cut off the piece of yarn, and then I'm just going to pull up with my needle. This will create a knot, and your casting off is finished. Look at this, it's so pretty. This is the beautiful horse Afghan square completed. It's amazing. You will weave in the ends of the loose yarn, and then it will be complete. You can use this for a square, or for a hot pad, or for art, anything that you want. So this is how we do it. I hope that this makes sense to you, and if you have any questions, be sure to comment below. Make sure you comment what type of patterns you want to see next. Thanks for watching, you guys. Bye.